200 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution began, the tropics were covered with rich rainforests, the lungs of the world, from which hot, moist, oxygenated air rose and disseminated itself over the globe. Much of the earth was covered by rich topsoil, alive with bacteria and molds and earthworms, making more soils and releasing nourishing trace elements and minerals into the soil from decomposing plant and animal material. Bees, moths, and butterflies flew from flower to flower, pollinating the plants and bringing fertile seeds into existence. The fruit and vegetables that this produced fed humans and animals with healthy food that protected them from most disease. There were more species of life on Earth than there's ever been since life began. The Earth was at its peak of biodiversity. Wild animals roamed in ecosystems all over the world. The sea was clean, full of fish, whales, phytoplankton. Rivers of clean water flowed down into the sea, taking silt with them, which fed phytoplankton near the river mouths. Thus, 80% of all fish started their lives at the river mouths. The rest began life in the protected coral reefs. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was taken in by the dense plant life on the planet. The oceans, the grasslands, the forests, made into plant matter, a carbohydrate so to speak, and only released back into the atmosphere when the plant died and rotted. Coal, oil, and limestone were in the ground. Life, 200 years ago, did have its drawbacks. Slavery, no women's rights, and illness led to a higher death rate. This was the time before telephones, before cars, before trains, before consumerism, before electricity. There were many things people did not have that we have now. But what they did have was nature in its unspoiled state. Clean water, clean air, fertile soil, a planet with a web of life that would sustain them and their children's children for millions more years. We are the last generation on Earth to have even an idea of what they had. Today, most of the forests are gone. The soil has largely been stripped from the ground. The soil-making bacteria, molds and earthworms that make the soil are missing because they were poisoned by pesticides or killed by intense heating of the ground when it was cleared for commercial agriculture. Soils are fed with chemicals which contaminate the water and kill the soil-making organisms. Therefore, are almost no trace elements and minerals in our soils. So plants and therefore humans and animals do not get the vital trace elements and minerals they need from food to resist disease. Bees and butterflies are in serious decline and may soon be gone altogether. If they die, what then will pollinate the fruit and vegetable plants? Genetically engineered seeds have largely contaminated naturally grown plants and caused them to be infertile or not to germinate unless there is a hormone in their cell present. They now control almost all the fertile seeds. That is, seeds that can be planted and will produce plants for the following year. They therefore control, to some extent, who eats and who doesn't. Wild animals in most parts of the world have been largely hunted out or died because their habitats were destroyed. They have been ruthlessly hunted down for the lucrative trade in wild animals in China. Millions of people in China eat wild animals from all over the world or use them as medicines. As the population and wealth of China grows, they pull more and more animals through this illegal system. The animal populations through many countries of the world are being decimated to supply this market. The sea is fast emptying of fish due to factory ships that sieve the sea with gill nets. These take out even the smallest of fish, so they do not get a chance to grow and breed. Factories' poisonous waste and raw sewage discharge into the rivers. The toxins from these kill the fish and marine life and create huge dead zones in the sea. The silt that used to wash down the rivers and nourish the phytoplankton at the river mouths is now often held back by dams. This has also reduced the amount of fish, as 80% of fish used to begin their lives in river mouths due to the large amount of phytoplankton that used to feed them. Coral reefs worldwide are dying due to the increased sea temperatures, and also because some are blasted from those trying to extract building material. Fish will soon have no sheltered place to begin their lives, and soon there will be no fish. Coal, oil and limestone laid down billions of years ago are being burnt up to give us electricity, industry, heat, transport and cement. The pollution and deadly amounts of greenhouse gases these produce is probably one of the most deadly threats to life on Earth today. Every living thing is contaminated with toxins from our food, water and air. Cancers, allergies and disease are widespread, particularly amongst people who eat battery-farmed food. A few hundred billionaires and several thousand people in the world are super rich, largely as a result of the plunder of our planet. Often, these are leaders of countries who use their own country's money as their own bank account and grow exceedingly rich while their people starve. By paying for the election campaigns and offering politicians a share in the wealth pie, some big corporations make sure governments will let them keep plundering. Often in less than a year, politicians have forgotten the people that put them in power and are engaged in increasing their personal wealth. Corruption, greed, these are the hallmark of the super rich, whether corporate or governmental, totally in control of most of our resources and largely without conscience. These few are leading the planet to extinction. Another 5% of the world have been invited by the super rich into relative wealth provided they run their enterprises. They have cars, cell phones, television, use planes, and lead the consumeristic way of life. They also have heart disease, cancer, obesity, stress, high walls, crime, and little time with their children, little time for leisure at all. They have internet. They have television. They can afford to see movies like An Inconvenient Truth. They read the newspaper. So they are beginning to realize from the media coverage of environmental damage and global warming that they have a short future if they are to carry on their lifestyle. They do not want to believe. So many will probably fight every effort to save the planet if it disturbs their comfort zone. Another 30% are workers and the main customers, earning a living by giving away their lives, spending all their money to buy basic necessities to live. They spend most of their day getting to work and back, doing a dull job for little money. Have enough to feed their family and save up for one of the first world items like TV. If something goes wrong, such as illness or losing their job, they have nothing. They have almost no idea that the planet is in trouble. They have their heads down trying to keep their families going. Anything that could disturb is a risk to them. Forgotten by their leaders, administered to by NGOs, disregarded in the leaders' quest for riches, they've been brought up in some long tradition of accepting that the chief can take it all. So they do nothing to stop their leaders from stealing the money that should be providing them houses, health, education, and training. Their country's land often does not grow food for them. It grows cash crops for the first world nations. The cash crops are to pay back money borrowed for their country by their leaders. Money they never saw. Money that often went into the pockets of their leaders. Their forests are cut down to provide chopsticks and hardwoods for first world furniture and buildings. Burnt down to grow soya for first world hamburgers. The water in the lakes from which they used to fish have all but dried out. because it was taken out upriver to irrigate cotton plantations for first world clothes. Their children are starving, often deformed, and many have cancer because of poisoning from pesticides used in the plantations. They don't need to be told the environment is under threat. They live with the results of it every day. However, they may not know how widespread the problem really is. So here we are, 6 billion people, breeding and consuming furiously on a worn-out, poisoned, finite planet poised on the brink of meltdown. Each for our own reasons, ignorant of or ignoring the fact that our planet is dying, unwilling to do the huge changes that might save it, each hoping that if we shut our eyes, the problem will go away. 6 billion and soon 9 billion people, billions of fish, animals and plants, being led into oblivion by a few thousand ruthless, greedy men. For centuries, there has always been someone predicting the end of the world. Much of it ancient superstitions, tales of meteors hitting the earth, the atomic bomb. But now, predictions about the end of the world are in every newspaper. The television is always screening programs warning about its happening. Our own eyes can see that something is changing. There is not a country in the world that has not experienced huge climate changes.
I would have argued that Katrina hitting New Orleans and those images around the world, I would have thought that was enough. I mean, how much is enough? What's your threshold? Do you need 5 Katrinas? Do you need? I mean, we have a prolonged drought in Australia. Our rice production is down by 91%. How much farther do you have to go? I would argue that we're seeing in some places some pretty dramatic changes that would suggest that we need to change our emission trajectory immediately. But the process here doesn't seem to support that view.
Everyone over 40 has seen the change in the ecosystems with their own eyes. We may not see what is happening beneath the surface of the sea, but we see the bleached coral reefs, and there is not a fisherman in the world who has not seen a rapid loss of fish in the sea. For the last 300 years, all the time we worried about other things, we were pouring into the atmosphere what was to become the most real and deadly danger of all: carbon dioxide. The Al Gore film, An Inconvenient Truth, did an enormous amount to get rid of any ideas some people may have had about this being part of a natural cycle. We now know that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are now higher than they have ever been since there has been life on Earth. Everywhere, people are beginning to worry. Conditioned as we all are to think the governments will do something about it, we uneasily continue with our present economic system. Why aren't governments doing something about what is happening? In March 2007, the IPCC report was released.
Of course I'm worried for the planet's future as well. I'm worried, and the scientists here are worried enough to come together and make this declaration. Yeah, of course. I mean, part of this motivation is to sort of make sure the science is at the fore of these negotiations, but we're seeing a planet subjected to greenhouse gas emissions that are unprecedented. The scientists are concerned enough about the future of the planet to come together with this declaration.
The International Panel for Climate Change, over 900 scientists and climate experts from all over the world, commissioned to predict what the effects of the increased carbon dioxide and other dense gases going into the atmosphere would be. Few people saw the report. A few brave newspapers published it. The United Nations tried to have it watered down. What was the IPCC saying that governments did not want us to know?
I think at least the next generation of the children, they still will have the future. But the future, they will have a very sad future. That's my view. I don't think they will know future. They will have the future. The future will be kind of horrified.
Frankly, I believe my children, and the grandchildren, especially grandchildren, not only my children, my grandchildren don't have a future, because the impacts which we already see now are so effective that one has to realize there is a problem, and we have to solve this problem now.
IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change, over 900 climatologists and scientists of the world unanimously agreed the climate is changing rapidly as a result of human actions primarily using fossil fuel and deforestation. But more important was what they predicted would happen as a result of these changes. They predicted that the average temperature of the Earth would rise by 6.4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures by the end of this century, and would bring about the end of most species, including humans. They predicted that, as the temperature rose, this is how it could happen. Bear in mind that we are already 0.8 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial temperatures. North America would become a dust bowl. The high states would be deserts. Agriculture would be wiped out. Ranching would be wiped out. Sand dunes would be seen throughout the United States. Worldwide sea levels would rise due to Greenland being an irreversible meltdown. This would submerge atoll nations, submerge low-lying deltas. The Peru glaciers would disappear, leaving 10 million people without water. The increased temperature of the sea would wipe out the Great Barrier Reef and make coral reefs extinct. In fact, 1/3 of all world species would face extinction. At 3.4 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial temperatures, the Amazon forest could be so dry it could burn in catastrophic ferocity. South America would be covered in smoke for about 3 years. This would increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the air and increase global temperatures even faster. This would also make a desert in the previous Amazon rainforest. In addition, the Arctic ice cap would disappear in summer months. Polar bears and many other Arctic animals would become extinct. They predicted that at that temperature the Sierra Nevada ice pack would melt. There would be no water in California. In Africa, the Kalahari Desert would spread over South Africa. At 4.4 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, they predicted something even more deadly. And from then, there would be no stopping the process. The permafrost in Siberia would melt, releasing methane frozen in the ice and carbon dioxide from billions of tons of previous frozen dead trees that would now rot. Methane and carbon dioxide gases would vastly increase, and temperature rise would be on the rampage. Rising sea levels from melted ice would displace hundreds of millions of people in Bangladesh, the Nile Delta, LA. Heat waves and drought make the subtropics uninhabitable. Deserts grow in Spain, Italy, and Greece. 50% of the species on Earth die. Agriculture in Australia collapses. At 5.4 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, global chaos, the West Antarctica sheet breaks, adding another 5 meters to global sea levels. The entire planet, ice-free, and sea levels rise an estimated 7 meters higher than today. South Asia collapses, as no ice means drying up of the Indus River. Monsoons, floods threaten millions. Super El Niños spark global weather chaos. Humans seek refuge closer to the poles, away from the heat. Tens of millions force their way into Scandinavia and UK. World food runs out. At 6.4 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, the rising seas lead to an increased pressure on the seabed. This might trigger the possible release of methane hydrates trapped in sub-ocean sediments. Methane fireballs will then tear across the sky, causing further warming. Oceans will lose their oxygen, and turn stagnant, releasing poisonous hydrogen sulfide gases and destroying the ozone layer. Deserts will extend almost to the Arctic. Hypercanes, hurricanes of unimaginable fury, circumnavigate the world, causing flash floods which strip the land of soil. Humanity is reduced to a few survivors eking out a living in polar refuges. Most of life on Earth has been snuffed out as the temperatures soar higher than hundreds of millions of years. Basically, Armageddon in our lifetimes. So, what can we do? We are in extreme danger, and few people understand the situation. Even those super rich who profit from the economic system now could have no customers left alive, nor employees, and their money will be nothing in the future. That is almost upon us. In a world of cyclones, collapsed food supplies, tornadoes, floods, droughts, dying forests, no pollinating insects, dead seas, with uninhabitable tropics, many coastal cities partially under the sea, fleeing desperate people, fighting for food, for water. It will be each person for themselves. Anarchy. Money will be irrelevant. The key thing is to change the mindset we have created over the past 90 years. That is thinking we can't live without the current economic system. A ridiculous mindset, considering that man in some form has been on Earth for 2 million years and, except for the last 90 years, has lived without this economic structure. The most important thing for everybody to understand is life on Earth is very like the working of a huge body. Every aspect of life is designed so that it works in harmony with other organisms to keep the delicate web of life continuously sustainable and evolving slowly. We are like one great body. In fact, some give this web of life, of which we are a part of, the name Gaia. Here we humans are, one particular organism on the planet, becoming too successful. Our numbers are soaring exponentially, like a bacteria infection in the body. Our numbers have grown so much that we are about to kill our host, this beautiful planet. The toxins from our activities are making this planet sick. Its normal functions have been interrupted. What is the result? Like what the body would do to protect itself from an organism that is too destructively toxic, too stressful, the Earth is raising the heat almost as if it's trying to kill off the destructive organism, man. The result of our actions has led to the planet becoming too hot. As soon as we started burning coal and making cement out of limestone, we started to release back into the atmosphere carbon dioxide that had been out of circulation for over 250 million years. Coal, oil and limestone are the ancient carbon dioxide that used to be in the atmosphere, making the planet too hot for life on Earth. This was captured by the living plant and held out of the atmosphere in the body of what the plant or the animal that ate for millions or billions of years. It is the existence of coal, oil and limestone as what they are, solids, instead of the gas carbon dioxide that kept the carbon dioxide out of circulation and made the planet cool enough for life to develop. By burning that coal, oil and limestone, we are putting that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, and soon it will again be too hot for life. Most of life on Earth will die, and over another few billion years, other forms of life may start again. From time to time, one organism has done what we are doing to the Earth, used up all the natural resources, poisoned themselves on their own waste, and then died out and become extinct. Most of the plants and animals who ever inhabited the Earth are now gone. They altered the world so much that they could not survive in it, much like man is doing today. So do we just accept this and think, well, it'll see us out? Do we care what our children are going to live through? Do we care about what most of us are going to see destroyed in our lifetimes? Do we quickly go and see it now before it's too late? or do we change what we are doing? If the last 200 years' advances had not happened, we may have not had but many things, but as a species we would still have a future. This planet would have gone on and on evolving with humans as part of it for a very long time. So how do we turn back the clock? Here are some solutions. The first thing is to make as many people as possible on Earth understand how the world works and what we have done to it, so that each one of us, within our own way of life, can use our own brains and actions to save the planet, for ourselves, for our children, and more especially for the whole web of life on which life depends. The basic thing is to understand coal, oil, and limestone are extremely important to us, left where they are, but will destroy us if we change them from what they are. If we release by burning the carbon dioxide that has been held by them out of the atmosphere for billions of years, that same carbon dioxide that, when it was in the atmosphere before, made the Earth too hot for life on Earth. And this is why 3.9 billion years ago the sun was about 25% cooler than it is today, but the Earth was a lot hotter. Too hot in fact for there to be life on Earth. This was because the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere may have been as much as 70%. In the period between 3.9 billion years ago and 250 million years ago, blue-green algae and other microplants developed in the sea. Using sunlight and water, these took carbon dioxide and turned it into a carbohydrate of its own body. From being a gas, carbon dioxide now became part of a carbon compound, a solid. More important, it was out of the air. When the plant died and rotted, the carbohydrate of its own body disintegrated and the carbon dioxide returned to the atmosphere, but not always. Sometimes, the amount of other dead bodies above it or silt from the now emerging land, which had no plants on it at the time, covered the organisms and the rotting process was prevented. The bodies of these small plants and animals became the coal and oil of today. But always the level of carbon dioxide stayed below 300 parts per million, because the carbon dioxide that would have raised it above that was in the earth as a compound, as a solid. Coal, oil, and limestone. That was until 200 years ago. Then humans discovered coal as a source of heat and energy. Gas came next, and lighting changed. The steam engine followed. Then the fossil fuel and oil was discovered. In a short time, ships ran on oil, as did cars, and electricity was made using coal. The ancient carbon dioxide from billions of years ago was now being returned to the atmosphere, and without realizing it, the beginning of what was to destroy us. Global warming over and above the regular cycles of the last 250 million years of life. At the same time, the link of septicemia to dirt was discovered. Sterilization of operating instruments was introduced, and the death of women in childbirth became from being common to rare. Then penicillin, insulin, anti-malaria drugs made their appearance, and the number of people started to soar. With oil came the beginning of the tractor and commercial farming, fertilizers, the deadly DDT. Then DDT killed all the natural pests that normally control the insects, the birds, and the lizards. It contaminated underground water reserves forever, but the amount of food increased and fed the rising population. Then in the 1950s began battery or factory farming. A huge amount of arable land was required to grow food for these animals that would be kept in small pens. That meant a huge amount of chemicals had to be made. The land had to be plowed. And all of this meant petrol oil was being burned. That ancient pre-life on Earth carbon dioxide kept getting put back into the atmosphere. In addition, factory shipping began. Huge ships began to go out to sea for longer and longer periods. with nets up to 7 kilometers long. All the time they were burning oil, letting out into the atmosphere the ancient carbon dioxide that had previously been locked up to allow life on Earth. Much of the fish they catch are too small for human consumption. Instead of being thrown back to grow and breed the next generation of fish, they ended up as animal feed. So the seas emptied and the carbon dioxide levels grew. With medicine stopping death in childbirth and infant death reducing, the numbers of humans on Earth grew. By 1990, there were almost 6 billion people on Earth and rising. One of the leading climatologists of the world was interviewed recently about what could be done to stop global warming. Reduce the population of the Earth from 6 billion to 1 billion was his reply. Instead, the population of the Earth is expected to rise to 9 billion within the next 10 years. To make matters worse, television and capitalism had combined to make each of these people aspire to a way of life of the rich. Everyone wanted more and more clothes, televisions, radios, cars, and flights. To provide these, more and more of the world had to be exploited. But more importantly, to extract the raw materials to produce these things and to manufacture them meant more and more carbon dioxide entering the atmosphere. In the 1960s, a man called Roger Revelle, a teacher of Al Gore, the ex-next president of the United States, started to measure the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. He proved that the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere were higher than they had ever been in the previous 650 million years, which is as far back as scientists are able to trace it. He saw that the global temperatures generally were rising and projected that the rise would have devastating consequences. The solution is obvious. As soon as possible, we must stop using fossil fuel and cement so we don't make the situation worse. But the temperature on the Earth is already such that if we do not lower it, glaciers will melt. Millions of people will be without water, and the sea will rise, covering most of the cities and the fertile coastal plains where much of our food is grown. The effect of greenhouse gases tends to lag about 30 years after they've been stopped accumulating. The second thing is to try to reverse what we have done and to take as much carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as possible. Now, 1 billion years is 1,000 million years. We have 3,700 million years that it took to take the carbon dioxide out of circulation in the first place. We have less than 100 years to get that carbon dioxide from the oil, coal, and lime that we have already used back out of the atmosphere again. But take heart, we have not used it all. Some of the carbon dioxide from billions of years ago is still being held out of the atmosphere as a hydrocarbon, oil or coal, or as a limestone, and is still in the ground. Essentially, we have to stop those intent on exploiting those last reserves. We actually need to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The carbon dioxide which came from ancient times, the time before 250 million years ago. And the age-old way of doing it is to change it into plant mass, preferably plant mass where it will stay for a long time. To grow plants to take carbon dioxide out of the air and hold it out. We call that a carbon sink. What are our options? Grasslands are a huge carbon sink, but desertification, overgrazing and fires wipe them out, and when they die they rot and give back the carbon dioxide anyway. However, increasing the amount of land under grassland would help. Phytoplankton, which are microscopic organisms in the sea, hold a large amount of carbon dioxide out of circulation. The more phytoplankton, the more carbon dioxide is held out of circulation in the atmosphere. But toxins in the sea are killing phytoplankton. The nutrients that used to come down the rivers with the silt to feed the phytoplankton in the sea are being held back by dams. And the increased temperature of the sea due to global warming all mean less phytoplankton. The solution: stop putting toxins in the sea. Redesign dams to let the nutrients out. And still, when phytoplankton die, they rot and release the carbon dioxide back into the air. That leaves trees. Long-living trees hold carbon dioxide out of circulation for up to several hundred years. We need to plant trees by the millions and nurture them to independence. Instead, we are clearing and setting fire to our trees. If we reforest as far and as fast as possible, preferably indigenous, long-living, fast-growing trees, we will not only do a lot to reduce the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but will also increase the rainfall. To date, Israel has planted 220 million trees and has resulted in a rainfall rise of about 10%. In addition to which, trees hold the soil, prevent erosion, shade the ground, which encourages soil-making organisms to flourish, and prevents the radiation of sun rays back to the atmosphere. Trees also regulate the flow of water into watercourses, so that instead of dry rivers and then flooding, which is always the result if we move trees upstream, the rivers maintain a flow of water year-round. Trees take water from the deepest parts of the ground, beyond where it is available to other plants, and seed it into the atmosphere for it to rain again. So plant indigenous and, if possible, fast-growing trees where we can, while the climate still provides sufficient rainfall. We need to stop the plundering of our rainforests, which are the lungs of the world now. Because the ground is so infertile in our rainforests due to thousands of years of rain washing out all the trace elements and minerals. Once cut down, rainforests can never return. The soil is too infertile. Rainforest trees can only grow where they have leaf litter to nourish them. Man always looks to science to make a plan, and one possible plan is carbon sequestering. These are machines that take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but they can't work fast enough to undo what we are doing daily. The third thing we need to do is to stop producing other greenhouse gases. Methane, for example, 20 times denser than carbon dioxide. The amounts of methane in the atmosphere are currently climbing 5 times faster than the current carbon dioxide. Why is this amount rising so fast? How can we stop it? Methane is produced by anaerobic bacteria which live in places where there is no oxygen, like rice paddy fields, rubbish dumps, and the stomach of animals which chew the cud. It also comes from forest fires. The amount of Chinese people in the world is currently 1.3 billion and rising. Their staple diet? Rice. Another huge population, India. Their staple diet? Rice. To cut down the amount of rice paddy fields, you need to stop those populations growing and use dry grown rice. The world produces millions and millions of tons of waste. A first world person produces nearly a ton of solid waste, rubbish, litter per year. We have entered a world of disposable everything. Disposable cups after each drink, handfuls of serviettes as well, clothes that become unfashionable after one season, packaging that is often more than the product itself in an effort to attract the buyer, in often ridiculous concerns for hygiene. We have entered the most wasteful few decades ever known to man. Millions of tons of useless articles manufactured for frivolous reasons, much of it slow to decompose, and all the time methane is pouring into the atmosphere. The more rubbish dumps, the more methane. To cut down on methane emissions, we have to stop the packaging, stop the disposables, stop the articles that are made for a short time use anyway, stop the manufacture of articles of superfluous use, because everything we can do to cut down the amount of waste we produce will take us closer towards saving the planet. Then there is methane from cattle and sheep, all ruminants. Since the world started eating battery-farmed meat, the number of cattle has soared, and so has the amount of methane. In Australia, there is a tax on meat because of the methane they produce. Because there are so many cattle, battery farming is one of the biggest contributors to global warming. Kept in small areas to stop them moving and losing weight, these animals are fed more than half the crops of the world and about 40% of the fish catch. Half the carbon dioxide produced in the world would stop if we did not have factory or battery farming. The carbon dioxide from the production of their feed, from the making and transporting of the fertilizers and pesticides, from the fuel for the farm machinery and the factory ships, from the energy for the battery chickens' 24-hour lighting, etc. Because we need so much animal feed, we use chemical fertilizers like nitrates. This is an unstable compound, and about 10% of it escapes as nitrogen into the air. Nitrogen is a dense global warming gas. But the damage done is far wider than that. Pesticides and fertilizers from commercial agriculture go into the water, into the underground aquifers and rivers, and sea to toxify everything. We then drink the water and eat the fish, and eat the battery farmed meat with its high levels of toxins, so we get sick. Our immune systems are compromised, and we are very susceptible to cancer. Cutting down rice growing rice in dry fields as opposed to rice paddies, stopping battery farming, stopping wrapping, stopping disposables, and cutting down on frivolous products does not seem a big price to pay for saving the world. Stopping fires should be done on a more serious level anyway. Is it as easy to stop carbon dioxide production as it is to stop methane production? First of all, with the situation so serious, much of what we use electricity to produce could stop. Is it so important to have these, for example? Plus all this packaging. Coal used for electricity generation can be replaced by natural, non-carbon dioxide producing energy, which is in an indefinite supply, and once installed, gives genuinely free energy. There could be a micro power station in each home, using sun, wind, hydrogen in the coal countries for domestic use, using energy efficient appliances. The electric and air-powered cars which plug in at night using renewable electricity and need no petrol or diesel have been available for years. If we continue with our existing economic system and consumeristic way of life, scientists are predicting a horrifying future. They are saying that we only have a little time to implement the solutions, because in a very short time, at the outside 8 years from now, that is before 2016, if we have not already massively changed our way of life, the breakdown of the ecosystems that give us life will be irreversible. We need to introduce wave and wind power generators, even out at sea, and solar voltaic farms in deserted areas, on a grid of direct current cabling to supply industry and commercial needs with electricity. We need to stop nuclear power for many reasons, but mainly because it uses more energy than you get from it. Carbon dioxide producing petrol or diesel to mine it. Dispose of dangerous tailings and extremely hazardous waste. It is also much more expensive to produce nuclear energy. If you really want to save the planet from global warming, coal-fired power plants should be stopped immediately, no matter what the upheaval. It is that serious a problem. Floods, droughts, and biofuel farming are already causing food shortages worldwide. Yet we continue to feed half of all edible crops to animals to make battery-farmed meat and eggs. Battery farming must stop. The number of farm animals must be reduced to the carrying capacity of the natural vegetation. Soils must be covered and restored using animal dung, plant matter, and earthworms, and the land should be used to grow food more appropriate for humans and to grow it organically and not genetically engineered food. producers must be forced to include the costs of undoing damage done to the ecosystems in the production of their products, the packaging of products, the use of the product, the marketing, the transport and disposal of it. And that money must be used to undo the damage. Here is a plan that makes everyone on Earth part of the solution. At the moment, very, very few people on Earth understand how the world works and what we are doing that is destroying it. Imagine if every person on Earth suddenly did understand what terrible danger we are all in and was encouraged that they should cooperate with solutions and use their own ideas to do everything within their own sphere of influence to save the planet. What incredible new energy would we see at work on this planet? Imagine if all media cooperated so that we were suddenly witnessing the ideas, the inventions, the films, the programs, the steps individuals, companies, municipalities, governments all over the world were taking. The ideas would cross-pollinate and be built upon. So why don't we do it? Part of the reason is who is going to do it? Will it be the petrol companies? So far they have done everything within their power to stop the production of anything that runs without an oil. Oil companies are among the richest companies in the world. Indeed, oil is the sole product of most Arab countries. Even though continuing to sell their product will kill them and their children as well, they do not seem to want to look at stopping the use of it. Presumably, they kind of hope scientists are wrong and that the world is not warming up. Will it be the governments? Representative government means that election is required. This should not, but does mean election campaigns. Election campaigns are expensive, and so the oil companies fund them. Now, could they expect funding from oil and energy companies if they then legislated as they must do if they are to survive? No more fossil fuel to be used at all. When you suggest that you should stop using fossil fuel-based energy, everyone points gloomily at China. What is the point of us stopping fossil fuel when China, which has the largest population in the world, is now having this economic boom and building 2 coal-fired power stations a week? Well, we have caused that boom by buying Chinese goods, which are only cheap because the world still allows the cost of what a product does to the environment to be left out, and because where there are so many people needing jobs, none dare complain about low wages or they will be replaced. We are empowering a nation to destroy the planet. The government should introduce environmental impact tax. All those products made with such environmentally damaging power, emitting such a lot of environmentally damaging waste into water, air and earth, would be prohibitively expensive. Then add the cost of removing the carbon dioxide from circulation that was expended in bringing the products to our countries. But would their corporate backers let them? Imagine if the government were to say what they must say if we are to survive. No more fossil fuel. Look how dependent we have become on oil and coal. 24 hours without oil brings many things to a standstill. So our leaders do nothing. So is the answer then to just continue as we are and hope for the best? Look how many jobs will be lost if we stop, is always the cry. In the world as predicted by the IPCC, how many not only jobs will be lost, but lives? Indeed, effectively, our whole planet. We have created a monster that is destroying us. We think we cannot do without our current economic, political and cultural system. A system we have had only for 90 or so years. And those are the years that are racing towards destroying the planet. The time has come for a complete change away from the economic system that is destroying life on Earth. The world as we know it. How many people is it really benefiting anyway? It is an economic system which does not honor life. It is working against nature, and our nature is working against it. It is unsustainable. It uses up its natural capital instead of using only the produce from the natural capital. And that capital is now almost at an end. We have entrenched in our constitution the concepts of a human-centered world in which the natural resources are only for our use, none of which vests any rights in plants, animals, soil, water, or air. The authors of these constitutions have always been those with commercial and industrial interests. Immortal entities without any environmental, social, value or moral responsibility. The giant corporations of the planet whose criteria for survival is profit-based. None of this will happen unless the people understand how the planet works and what we are doing that destroys it. Then they will cooperate, indeed welcome the changes that must happen if the world is to survive. No. Each and every person within their own context will become conservers instead of consumers, limited in their number of children, bring in the renewable systems of agriculture, economy, lifestyle, until the world is once again in balance with what it can sustain. Never again to advance into short-sighted, destructive economic and cultural systems. What a vision! A whole world of people cooperating through understanding and acting in harmony of life. This is our only chance, and we have a very short time to bring it about. Will you be part of the solution, or continue to be part of the problem and perish because of it?